In this video, we're going to talk about solving problems with fractions, decimals, and percents. Just like in our last video lessons, you're going to need a few things. This time you're going to need your math journal, a calculator, pencil, and eraser. So if you don't have those things, go grab them, pause the video, and push play when you have what you need. So let's talk a little bit about fractions, decimals, and percents. There are three different ways of communicating numbers. So decimal numbers always have a decimal place, and they might be less than 1, they could be a whole number, or they could be more than 1. Fractions can also be less than 1, they can be 1 whole, because 2 halves would be a whole, or they could be more than 1 whole, such as in the case of 3 halves. So we have less than 1, 1, and more than 1, less than 1, 1, and more than 1. We have percentages. We might have less than 100%, 100%, or more than 100%. So numbers are communicating something about the real world, and it just so happens that all of these numbers can be compared. Now, the trick to this is that we want to make everything a decimal. Whether we're working with a fraction or a percent, we want to try to get it to be a decimal. So we're going to convert our fractions to decimals and our percents to decimals. And the way we're going to do that, we want to remember decimals always have a denominator of 1. So if we can get our denominators to be equal to 1, we can compare these numbers and start to use them to solve problems. So let's talk about how to convert fractions and percentages into decimals. And for this next part, I'm going to ask that you take this note in your math journal. Let's first do a quick review of converting fractions to decimals. You've already done this in the previous lesson, so I'm just going to do one example here, and you're going to put into your math journal. Well, let's convert 3/4 into a decimal. So we have 3/4, 3/4, but we want to get it over 1. Whatever number we get here is going to be our decimal. So like we did in the previous video, we want to figure out how to get 4 to 1. To get any number into 1, we divide it by itself. Whatever we do to the bottom, we also do to the top. So in my calculator, I'm going to put 3 divided by 4. You'll notice that's the same as doing the numerator divided by the denominator. I'm going to get my decimal here. So 3/4 as a decimal would be 0.75. So now let's talk about how to take a percent and turn it into a decimal. And let's start with 63%. I want to turn that into a decimal. Now what we need to know about percentages is that they are actually a fraction. That's always out of 100. So 100% we know is 100 out of 100, and any other percent is going to be that number out of 100. So we need to start thinking of any percentage as a fraction out of 100. In this case, we have 63 out of 100. But we need to convert that into a decimal. So just like any other fraction, we want an equivalent fraction where the bottom number of the denominator is 1, and the number we get on top is going to be our decimal. We want our 100 to turn into 1. So just like any other fraction, we're going to divide it by itself. Whatever we do on the bottom, we're going to do on the top. So I'm going to divide 63 by 100 in my calculator. And again, it's the numerator divided by the denominator, and that's going to give me my decimal. So it's actually the same method we used for this fraction. We're going to use the same thing for a percentage. So 63% is 0.63 as a decimal. When it comes to percentages, there's a little bit of a trick to it. And I say trick, but what I mean is if you understand what the number 100 is, you'll understand why this works. Take the number 63. 63 as a number would have a decimal place here, 63.0. We don't usually put this because we don't need it if it's 0. But for this case, let's say that it's there. Now, if we multiply something by 10, 63 times 10, we add 1 0 to get 630. So 63 times 10, we're moving the decimal place this way. So we get 630 points. If we divide by 10, we actually move the decimal place in the opposite direction. We get 6.3. If we multiply by 100, we would actually move the decimal place twice. Times 10 times 10. So we actually get 6,300. Same goes for division. If we divided by 100, we'd actually move the decimal place twice, which would give us 0.63. So whenever you're converting from a percent to a decimal, all you have to do is move that decimal place 2 spaces, put the 0 here. For example, if I was converting 5% to a decimal, I could divide 5 by 100 and get 0.05 in my calculator. Or I could see the 5 and move the decimal place once, twice, put a 0 in any empty bump there, and get my same answer, 0.05. Whether you're converting from a fraction with a denominator that's different from 100, so not a percentage, or a percentage, you're going to take your numerator divided by your denominator to get your decimal. Once your numbers are in decimal form, they're much more easy to compare and use to solve problems. So let's take a little summary note here, and then we'll move on to some problem solving. To solve problems with fractions and percents, a good first step is to convert to decimals. To convert to decimals, divide the numerator, the top, by the denominator, or the bottom. So pause this video and make sure you have this note in your math journal. Let's look at these 4 problems here. And remember, these are going into your math journal. Let's look at the first one. 3/4 plus 1.5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to convert these into decimals and then add them together. This one's already in a decimal, so I'm just worried about 3/4. So 3/4 into a calculator, I'm dividing 3 by 4, and I get 0.75. Add 1.5 to that, and I get my total of 2.25, or 2 1/4. So try this next one on your own and see if you get the same answer I do. pause the video here and then push play when you have an answer. So 0.8 is already a decimal, so I'm just converting my 2/3, and 2 divided by 3 in my calculator gives me approximately 0.67. I'm rounding to 2 places, that's fine. So now I get to do 0.8 subtract 0.67. That will give me my final answer of 0.13. Now things are getting a little bit tricky. So when we're talking about percentages, I'm talking about 23% of something. Now it's always out of 100, but that 100 could be anything. It's 23% or a proportion of some total. In this case, I'm talking about this 510. I want to take away 23% of 510. So I need to figure out what is 23% of 510. When you're trying to figure out what 23% of something is, you're going to replace the word of with a multiplication sign. So we're going to figure out this number and then subtract it from 510. See if you can figure this number out. Try to figure out what 23% of 510 is. So pause the video and then push play when you have an answer. So I converted 23% into my decimal by moving my decimal place or dividing by 100. And then I multiplied that by 510 and I have my 117.3. So now we just need to figure out what 510 is when we subtract 117.3, and that will give us our final answer for this problem. I put that into my calculator, I get 392.7. So now using this question as a guide, I want you to try number 4. You're going to add 110% of 45 to 45. Go ahead, pause the video and play when you have an answer. So first we need to figure out what 110% of 45 is. 110% into a decimal. 110 divided by 100 gives me 1.10. So I could just move the decimal place or put it into my calculator. To figure out what 110% of 45 is, I would multiply 45 by 1.1. I would get 49.5. So now I just need to add that to my 45, which gives me 94.5. You always want to look at your question and say, does this answer make sense? So if I was adding just 100% of 45, it would be 45 plus 45, which would give me 90. But because it's 110%, it's a little bit more than 45, which is what I got when I got 49.5. When I add it together, it's a little bit more than what double 45 would be. This is why it's really important to really understand what you're putting into your calculator and if it makes sense or not. Having a strong sense of what these numbers mean is really important. So as you move on through the slides, I'm going to ask you to apply this knowledge to some new situations. I haven't shown you how to do those things exactly. That's why I'm asking you to apply some knowledge to a new situation. And that's a tricky skill. I'm not asking you to copy me or do something exactly like I've done it. I'm asking you to do something new and challenging. So it's supposed to be hard, but I'm definitely here to help you. So if you're going through the slides and you're not sure what to do, please ask for help and know that it's supposed to be a challenge.